Yeah, thanks Brian for doing the DVD. It's quite obvious looking around the room. There's some of you who are a lot greyer now than you were at that time, and some of us who have a lot less hair maybe now than we did at that time. But I think the other example maybe, and what we can be absolutely clear about from that DVD, that this isn't a campaign for any George Lees who might be out there. There's no place in this campaign for shrinking violets or people who don't want to do a bit of hard work. The type of campaign that's going to be necessary to defeat water charges is one of hard graft, a seriously well organised and determined campaign that's prepared to go the distance will be the only thing that will succeed. We should be under no illusion whatsoever but that the political establishment and big business have organised for this. They're not going to roll over and give up on this just on foot of a few protests, even big protests, or a few petitions or anything like that. It is correct to say that water charges are part of a bigger attack on ordinary people, and we do have to see the issue in that context, but we also have to see it on its own. This is a big prize for the establishment. They see a kitty of €1 billion that's there for the taking, and they're going to go after it, and it's going to be a fairly serious fight. And the only thing that will call that into check is a well-organised campaign of civil disobedience which makes the charge uncollectible while at the same time exerting massive pressure on the political establishment. That's the experience of the 1990s, and that's the approach that we have to take today. Now, we are, as Joe says, at the very early stages of this campaign, and it's not entirely clear how the issue is going to unfold. On the one hand, we have the Commission on Taxation, which has recommended the introduction of a flat charge as a means of financing the installation of meters over a period in time. On the other hand, we have Minister Gormley's office who've come out and said absolutely not. They're adamant that meters are going to be brought in first, on a phased basis, and only when the meter is in place will a charge then come into being. What will actually transpire, we don't know as of yet. It is the case, and our sort of spies or fishing for information would indicate that the Greens seem to be fairly serious on that. Flat charge would be very embarrassing for them, but I think we all know their embarrassment threshold is non-existent, so really anything could happen in that regard, so we don't really know. But I think it's clear that one way or another, this could, what they were talking about is a rollout in 2011 of meters in order to facilitate the introduction of a charge in 2012, and maybe that's the type of timescale that we're looking at. It could even be a combination maybe of different methods in different areas. It is the case that the law needs to be changed in order to reintroduce water charges, but they don't need any legal changes in order to bring in meters. It's a different thing, so they could, with the tendering arrangements and all of that taken as given, bring that in, more or less begin to roll it out towards the end of this year, start of next year. So I suppose the first point to make is, while we're not exactly clear in how the issue is going to unfold, what we should register here, and the purpose of this meeting, is that a decisive change has taken place, and it's not now a question of if, but very much a question of when. The second thing I think we can be clear about is that meters are going to be an intrinsic part of this campaign, maybe in a manner which they weren't the last time. And we've seen the battle lines opening up. We made some points this morning about the propaganda onslaught that took place during the cold weather, where we had the stories of householders going to work, leaving the taps running, going absolutely mad and not conserving water and all the rest of it. And what we've seen really is a little bit like the bin charges, a campaign of sort of trying to make bin tax, recycling, water conservation, meter has been almost synonymous with each other and representing the same thing, in the hope that people fall for it and that they get away with masking the real intent, which is a new tier of local taxation. So the first task of a campaign, we would say, is to answer that propaganda, and today is part of that process. The lesson of the Federation of Dublin Anti-Water Charges campaigns, the first and most important lesson, was that we won, if you like, the hearts and minds of people. The arguments of the campaign were common currency with people. You go out into the estates, you'd have a meeting, and people would talk about the tax amnesty, about the money going to Larry Goodman, about double taxation. Everybody knew the arguments. They knew the justice of the stance they were confident in those arguments, and so on. And how did it get to that stage? Well, obviously that happened on the back of huge amount of public meetings, issuing of material and so on. Obviously that's only going to come into its own once the charge is introduced. That's when it will really take off. But we do have a responsibility to begin that battle now. I think it is slightly different maybe in some ways than the bin tax. During the bin tax, you had different councils at different times introducing different types of charges, and as a result, I suppose the campaign was maybe a little bit looser. I think this time, and the experience of the last water charges battles, is that it's far better to have one campaign, a bit like the Federation, which was autonomous in terms of the regions, in terms of the nuances of maybe how people built, but people were united around a single platform and tactics and so on. At this stage, we can only really outline the bones of a strategy. The flesh will only happen once the campaign starts and the charge is actually introduced. But for now, what we have to say, the bedrock of any platform and any campaign, in our opinion, has to be non-payment. This is absolutely key. Advocating and organising non-payment is the first task. You can't really have a campaign without that. Nothing else will have the same impact or pressure. If we can succeed in making the charge uncollectible, well then you're kind of halfway there, 3/4 of the way there. Because in effect what that does is it demoralises the establishment, it's costing them more money than they're actually recuperating, there's a political fallout, and it's obviously boosting the confidence of residents in the community. Of course, to do that and to build non-payment, you have to have a campaign that shows it's capable of defending those people who make the decision not to pay. Every penalty that the establishment try and impose to frighten non-payers into paying, we have to, as a campaign, respond collectively to that. And the last time round, I think we showed that very effectively, and the footage would vindicate that. Thousands of people went to court, we mobilised to resist disconnections, protests in the community, mass meetings. In the cases where they did disconnect people, we were in place and able to reconnect them. But to be able to do that, you obviously have to have a serious campaign, not one that just arrives when the battle is over, here we are, and all the rest. It has to be based on consistent work in the community. People have to know who to contact, where to go, what to do if an attack comes on. So building support for non-payment is the first basis of the type of campaign that is necessary in this regard. I think with the way and the change in which they're bringing in the charge this time round, linking it to the question of water meters, that resistance to metering is also an equally important platform, particularly if meters are going to be a forerunner of the charge. Now, as we said this morning, we give absolutely no truck to the idea that meters are a conservation measure. This is a total and utter con. Meters are being ordered, are being fought for one reason and one reason only: to commodify water and lay the basis for privatisation. That is the only basis for that, in order so that they can identify an individual's supply and then ultimately privatise the service. And if we accept that that's the case, then the only conclusion that you can draw from that is that any campaign that's going to take on the question of water charges now also has to resist the meters. In some ways, maybe it's a little bit like the debate that we had in the Federation about the court cases and how would we respond to the attacks of the court cases. And there were some who maybe took the view that, well, we should let the decisions go, let the judgments go. Sure, we're going to lose the cases anyway. It doesn't really make a big difference. Let the judgments in and so on. We'd still encourage people not to pay. That was debated out in the campaign, and the conclusion was that no, we shouldn't do that. Not that we've any illusions in the courts bringing justice or anything like that, but that we would use the courts as a vehicle to organise people, to give people confidence to come together, that they were not facing this on their own, and to stall and delay the local authorities at every turn in being able to go after non-payers. And that was quite brilliantly done. In the end, we went, and it took years, but we brought thousands of people came to court with us. Many of those cases, probably thousands of them, were lost. Most of them were lost in the courts, but we prevented tens of thousands of others from being targeted. And